Nature is beautiful because it looks like art. And art can only be called beautiful if we are conscious of it as art, while yet it looks like nature. Immanuel Kant. I talked for several weeks now about what beauty is to Kant and what taste means to him. And I talked about how the judgment that the aesthetical power of judgment does when it judges something to be beautiful, how that is a judgment which has four particular moments which distinguish it from other kinds of judgments, even other kinds of judgments about pleasure. I explained how the judgment on beauty, when it comes to its quantity, is a universal judgment. We say that something is not just bringing pleasure to us, but to everyone. And taste to Kant is exactly the ability to pick that which brings universal pleasure, not just private pleasure to myself. And I said that according to its quality, it is a disinterested judgment. I don't want anything from the beautiful thing. I don't want to own it, to consume it. I just contemplate it and appreciate its form, which leads to the moment of relation, according to which it is a judgment about, well, the form of something and about how that particular form is purposive, but not serving an objective purpose in the world, but rather purposive to ourselves, to the subject which observes this form, to our our faculty of cognition, our power of imagination and our intellect, who are set into a purposive play with one another by viewing that beautiful thing. And lastly, when it comes to modality, I said the beautiful is that which is liked with necessity, as long as we do look at it in a disinterested way. Well, that's what I said generally about the beautiful, and I also discussed how it is somehow connected to morality, and I discussed whether we can dispute or squabble about the beautiful. Now in this lecture I want to talk about art, because to Kant there are two kinds of objects that can be beautiful, and that is nature and art. There's the beautiful of nature and the beautiful of art. And what is art to him? Well, first, in the most general sense, so this is not about beautiful art yet, this is just about art in general. In the most general sense, art is sort of just the opposite of nature, right? Nature is that which is not made by human beings, which seems to just be or come into being by accident without anyone having planned it to be so, while art is that which is created with a plan, with a purpose. Right? So again, this is not talking about beautiful art necessarily. Think of the word artificial. So anything that is artificial, that is not natural. Like we talk nowadays of artificial intelligence, for example. But really anything we produce is artificial. It is not an object of nature. And that way, Kant says art is, in the most general sense, methodical use of our skill. So if I have certain skills and I apply them in a methodical way to produce something, then that is art. It is important that art needs to follow a certain method, according to Kant. So not everything that humans produce is art. If I just do something without really knowing what I'm doing, like of course I can I can just mindlessly hit on the keys on a keyboard. That will produce some sort of text, probably not something intelligible, but I will thereby write letters down. That's not art. Art needs to follow a certain method. Well, but if this is art in general, then according to Kant, there can be two kinds of art. One is what he calls mechanical art. The other is aesthetical art. Mechanical art means that you have certain knowledge, theoretical knowledge about how the world works, about the laws of nature, say, and you just apply this. So it doesn't necessarily need extra skill that necessarily needs to be trained. It mostly needs this certain knowledge, and now you apply this knowledge to produce something. Again, this is not beautiful art. This is maybe what we would call craftsmanship, or nowadays technology. And I mean, technology is also art. It comes from the Greek techne, which is the Greek word for art. It is something that is artificial. It is something that is created in an artful manner. But of course not to be beautiful, but to be useful, right? So this is useful art. This is art that does serve a purpose. It's not just that its form is purposive for us as subjects, but rather it does follow a specific purpose. So no matter whether you're baking bread, or whether you are building a house, or whether you are creating a certain medicine, or whether you are building a computer or phone nowadays, all of that is mechanical art to Kant. And he would say that in the aesthetical art and in the beautiful art, mechanical art does play a role. So the artist, in a more narrow sense, in the way we usually use the word artist, he does need to have some knowledge and to be able to do mechanical art to some degree. Whether it is the stonemason and the sculptor who is able to turn a block of stone into a statue, or whether it is maybe the poet who knows certain rules of rhyme, of rhythm, and who does apply these rules when creating a poem. This mechanical side is of course not all there is to beautiful art. It needs to be more than just that. It needs to be art of genius, Kant would say, and I will explain what exactly genius is to him in the next lecture. But there is a side to this beautiful art which is mechanical, and which therefore, like any mechanical art, can be learned, which doesn't require genius, it just requires certain training. That's the thing with mechanical art, you can learn it. But besides this mechanical art, as I already said, we have aesthetical art. And aesthetical to Kant means corresponding to sensuality, corresponding to viewing, and corresponding to our feeling of pleasure and displeasure. So that means that aesthetical art is art that is meant not to be useful, not to serve a certain purpose out there in the world, but rather it is art that is meant to be pleasing to us in some way or another. But here again, there are two different kinds according to Kant. Because, as I talked about in the lecture on pleasure, to him there is sense pleasure. So pleasure that I receive because I have some passive, some pathological interest that I receive through my senses. And then there's the proper aesthetical pleasure that I get from beauty. And therefore, Kant distinguishes the aesthetical art into pleasant art and beautiful art. And this is a distinction that I feel nowadays often isn't made. Nowadays, our concept of art is quite superficial. So by art, we usually mean not the mechanical art, but the aesthetical art. But often it's not further differentiated. Often it's not, there is not made much of a difference between the art that is merely pleasant or entertaining and the art that is actually beautiful. In fact, when you do make that distinction, nowadays in this relativistic age, you often get accused of being snobbish. Well, let's look at this pleasant art for a while. To Kant, the pleasant art could be anything like the art of cooking, the art of playing music that is not actual beautiful music for its own sake, but the kind of music Kant says that is there to just accompany a society while they are eating. Or the art of joking, the art of conversation. Also, all sorts of games that one might play with other people. All of that Kant would consider pleasant art. So, pleasant art is any sort of art that is, well, as the name suggests, meant to be pleasant, that is meant to be entertaining, that is meant to speak to our senses and to our pathological interests in one way or another. No matter in what sublimated form, still it is pleasant art if it is just there to entertain you, to, well, you could say to sort of fill your empty time when you are currently not working, when you are currently not engaged in serious businesses and undertakings, but you have free time. Then you probably want to somehow fill that free time so that you are not just bored. And that which you fill it with, that is gonna be in many cases the pleasant art. But the thing is that this filling of your time still will leave you empty when it's just pleasant art. It's like eating something that, well, bloats your stomach, but without making you really feel satisfied, without really making you feel like your hunger is gone. I mean, unaufkläred people, they are slaves of their senses. Being aufklärt is, after all, about leading yourself. Being unaufklärt is about being led by others, but many only understand that as being led by other people, and therefore think themselves aufklärt if they don't blindly follow what other people tell them. But no, I would say that not only is this not the only way in which you can be unaufklärt, it's even the less common way. The most common way is being led by your own senses. And since unaufklärt people are so, so much slaves of their sensuality, that means that they are prisoners of the moment. Because if you think about it, what is it that your senses give you? It's always the current moment. With your senses, you only sense what is there and what is affecting you right now. You cannot go beyond the moment with your senses. For your senses, there is no past and there certainly is no future. You can, of course, go beyond the moment in your thinking. I can think of the past, I can think of the future, but as long as you are just sensing, there's neither. And therefore, the unaufklärt tend to be very much prisoners of the moment. And their art, that pleasant art, is also an art of the moment and of momentary pleasure most of the time. I mean, you may do something that pleases you in that particular moment. Like, let's say you are somehow with company, you are with other people, you are going out, you are at a party. At the time, when you are talking to them, when you are joking around, you may say that you are having fun. And I'm not saying that you aren't having fun in some way. But the thing is, afterwards, you don't take anything with you from that. Most of the time, you probably won't remember. If I ask you some days later, you won't remember what was said. Maybe you had fun during the conversation, but really it was a shallow conversation. Nothing of substance was really said. The jokes were shallow. You don't even remember the jokes probably. Maybe you remember that there were jokes, but not the particular jokes, not what you actually found funny. And the same is true about other such things, like you may watch certain superficial movies or shows, or you may play certain games on your phone or whatever, and sure, they fill up your empty time. They make you not feel completely bored in that moment. But the feeling doesn't last beyond that moment. You don't take anything with you, so to say. So they don't shape you. They don't turn you into another person. And that's a difference to other things you could do to fill up your time. Like science, Kant says, science actually gives us something. If you used your time reading a book containing knowledge, or listening to a lecture containing knowledge, such as this one, then it's not just there to fill up your moment and to make you less bored in the moment, but also you take something with you from it. You go away from that book or from that lecture a different and a richer person than you were before. And the same, Kant would say, so in another way, it's true of actual art, of the beautiful art. Here too, you are not just entertained for the moment, like if, for example, you are reading or watching a play of Shakespeare. Kant would say here, sure, you get pleasure in a moment, but it's also more than that. You can take something with you. You can actually learn something from it. When it comes to Shakespeare, Kant would say that he presents real characters. So even if the particular narrative is not true, even if the particular story and the particular persons in that story are made up, it's something that could happen in a way, because his characters are so real. And in that way you can learn to know people through Shakespeare. Even without meeting actual people, you can know people and characters through Shakespeare, Kant would say. And a proper work of art, just like maybe a scientific book or lecture, or maybe sometimes even more than a scientific book or lecture, a proper work of art gives you something to think. Something that will not just fill up your time while you are experiencing that artwork, but something on which you can continue to reflect, and something about which you can talk to other people. Like a truly great book or a truly great movie or whatever, really gives us something to think, while a merely pleasant, a merely entertaining book or movie doesn't. I put it aside, I'm done with it, and more or less immediately I will have forgotten it. That's also why Kant sometimes warns of the bad novels of his time, saying that, well, they, yeah, as I said, they fill up your time, but they are really a waste of time and also a waste of energy. They will, in a way, weaken your intellectual capacities because your mind is dealing with them, but at the same time, you yourself are not taking them seriously. Kant says, since this is all made up and unrealistic, like the story this novel tells is not true. The people that act in this novel, they are not real people and they don't behave like real people. Since that is the case, the reader himself probably won't bother remembering this because it would be useless knowledge, right? So as soon as you have put that novel aside, you have forgotten what you actually read. You yourself could not retell the story later or go into details about the different characters in that novel. And therefore, this is quite useless. And I would say that most of the art that we have nowadays is such pleasant art. Is art that is meant to entertain, but not to cultivate you. And it really doesn't matter which kind of art we are talking about. So whether people are doing a train ride, listening to some soulless drumming of some music, or whether people are watching some movie, like, I don't know, the latest Marvel movie, or whether people are shooting some pixels in a video game while screaming over the earphones at their fellow players, or whether people are reading a bad novel and asking themselves who might be the murderer in this crime novel or in this romance novel. Will they get together? Won't they get together? Or whether people are playing some games with cards or figures or whatever. All of that is often quite empty, because all of that is often just meant to excite our senses, to create certain sensations, to maybe make you go oh and ah, and maybe produce slaughter or tears. And Kant says this is really quite easy to do. It is easy to stir up people's emotions, because everyone has emotions, Kant says, and it is quite easy to speak to them. That is not to say that such pleasant art cannot be, well, very artful in some way. Of course, there can be a lot of technique, and again, this is really just a Greek word for art. There can be a lot of refined technique in it. I mean, if you look at many shows that are aired now, or movies like the latest Marvel movie or whatever, sure, it's not high art, but still there is a lot of work of some kind going into it, like all this programming of the CGI, all these special effects. Sure, that is quite artful in a way. But despite their artfulness, such works of art are without spirit or without soul, you could say. And I mean, many people will freely admit that they only want pleasant art. They will say stuff without being ashamed of it. They will say stuff like, oh, I just want to turn off my brain and be entertained by this movie or whatever. which I think thinkers like Fichte or Nietzsche would say shows their lack of strength. It shows that they are weak. I don't want to get into that more here because that would mean going beyond Kant, as Kant himself has not talked about this pleasant art much and has not reflected on what people really are seeking here and why they are seeking it. But if you turn to other thinkers, like I said, like to Fichte or Nietzsche, they would say wanting to turn off, wanting to relax is the mark of someone who feels overworked, who feels like his strength has already been strained, and who doesn't want to have to do anything anymore. They would say that a strong person, someone who feels fullness, overflowing abundance of his own powers, would not want to sit around and to just be passive. He would want to do something. But nowadays, lots of art that we have is for being passive. It is art that is not meant to inspire us. It is art that is not meant to call us to new actions. But rather it is art that is meant to only be consumed. And indeed, it actually often is consumed, like food or whatever. So like something that you consume, you take in once, and then it is gone. If you think about it, this pleasant art usually gets used up quite quickly. Like a joke might be fun the first time you hear it, but if you were to hear it over and over, you would soon get bored of it. And the same is true for many of our shows or many of our books. They are really only entertaining to a degree as long as they are still new. And once you know them, they are no longer interesting. This is not true for the actual art. Actual art, like again, a great movie or a great play, a great novel, is something you will want to come back to again and again. And you will enjoy it again and again. You will even find new things in it to enjoy every time, new details in it that previously you missed. But this superficial pleasant art, you consume it once, maybe twice, and then it really has lost its entertainment factor. I think it is quite interesting in this context how nowadays there is such an aversion to spoilers. This seems pretty universal now, and it seems something that people hardly question. When it comes to stories of any kind, no matter whether they are told in books or movies or video games or whatever, people seem to assume that the main fun from being told a story comes from being surprised, comes from the story being in a way unforeseeable. And if you go into comment sections, like on certain YouTube videos, when someone gives out a spoiler and spoils people, I mean, it's in the very word that we choose to give to this phenomenon, spoiler. We are saying this movie or this book or whatever is now spoiled to me, like spoiled food that I can't enjoy anymore. You find that people treat the person who spoils others, sometimes that person is treated like the worst human being. Sometimes when someone puts out a spoiler, maybe without thinking, people react as if he had been flying or going on a cruise. And on the other hand, if the person actually goes flying, then he is not treated that way. Then he's not treated like some evil person. Even though it would be more justified in this case. Well, I find this interesting. People hardly question it now, but really it's quite a new phenomenon. If you look back at the stories that were told in previous centuries, and not just here, but all around the world, in all kinds of different societies, you will find that a lot of these stories, in their structure, it was easy to tell where they would go. Lots of these stories didn't contain big surprises or twists or whatever. They were quite straightforward. And also, lots of the stories, they dealt with material, with certain stories, certain narratives that were well known. Like a lot of the time they were retellings of certain myths, like the Greek myth or the Assyrian legends, or they were retellings of certain parts of history, and people already more or less knew what was gonna happen. I mean, I don't think that when the ancient Athenians went to see the tragedy of Sophocles, they were really excited about, oh, how will it end? Will Oedipus find out why there is this sickness in his city? Will Oedipus really kill his father? Or has he really killed his father? Will he really marry his mother? I mean, people already knew that. Or when people went to see Shakespeare, they probably weren't excited about, oh, is Caesar going to die or is he going to live? They probably knew that Caesar dies. So to them, being spoiled was not a problem. They already were spoiled. So clearly, they must have sought something else from these stories. And I must admit, I never quite got this hate of spoilers. Even when I was younger, there was never really a point where I cared much about spoilers. Quite a few movies or books that I greatly enjoyed, I got spoiled. I got told by people what was gonna happen, or I read about it. I read the Wikipedia article about the plot even before reading the book. Or even I had the book and I turned to the last pages right at the start and read some of the last pages, so I knew the ending. And that never took the smallest bit of joy away from me. The opposite even. But I think it is quite telling how much people now hate spoilers. It shows that what they seek is not to reflect about a story and about the plot. What they seek is not thinking about it, really getting inside of it, really understanding it, but rather what they seek is excitement. But they seek is surprise. They want a sudden twist where it turns out the friend of the hero, the good guy, is actually the evil villain who was pulling the strings all along, or where suddenly a beloved character dies without you expecting it or whatever. It's really, they want to be overwhelmed in a way. They want this to be like a roller coaster ride, where suddenly you're pulled down and then you're pulled up, and like you scream with excitement in the roller coaster ride. They want to go oh and ah and be surprised like that. So really, it's quite like in a horror movie, when you want to just be shocked by suddenly the monster or the murderer or whatever jump scaring you out of a dark corner. It's really the same in these stories that work with all these shocking twists and subversions and so on. And I would say that all of that is basically pornography. And by that I don't mean that it is necessarily about sex. So often it is that too. I mean, many books, many video games, many movies are basically softcore porn. I mean, there are certain shows where in every single episode you see a pair of boobs, or maybe several pairs of boobs. People seem to need this sexual excitement. They seem to need these sex scenes, this naked skin, which to someone like Wilhelm Reich would say a lot about how dissatisfied people must be with their sex lives. Because if you actually had a healthy, satisfied sexuality, this wouldn't do much for you. You then wouldn't read novels like all these novels aimed at teenage girls or dissatisfied housewives about some sexy billionaire or mafia boss or vampire or whatever snatching up the heroine and having hot BDSM sex with her. You wouldn't waste your time with stuff like that if you were not dissatisfied on some level. But the thing is, I'm not talking about sex here. I'm using the word pornography in a broader sense. What I mean by this is that while proper pornography titillates you with naked bodies and with screwing, this other pleasant art titillates you in other ways. Maybe these movies, like Marvel movies, they are not sexual pornography. They, instead of nakedness, they offer explosions and great battles and quips and one-liners. But really, it is the same principle. I mean, what is pornography? It's certainly not beautiful art, but it's also not mechanical art. It is pleasant art. Maybe it is a especially primitive and crude form of pleasant art, but the basic quality between actual pornography and other such artworks is not different. It's a difference in degree, but not in the inner principle. The inner principle being that it is only meant to entertain and to excite your senses. It is, I think, a fitting analogy to consider that the actual genital embrace means two people truly coming together, truly experiencing closeness, truly touching each other, truly melting into one, truly having an exchange of energies. It can even produce a completely new human being. While, on the other hand, when you are watching pornography by yourself, that may bring a certain satisfaction to some degree. And it certainly may excite your arousal, but in the end, you are still just a wanker. It is something, well, that is completely self-centered and unproductive, fruitless. Nothing comes out of it. It is just a waste, so to say. And that is what I would say about this pleasant art more generally. Maybe this, this unproductiveness and this not getting touched in any way is especially apparent in some of the newer forms of this pleasant art. Even at the danger of sounding like some old ignorant boomer complaining about the young generation, I can't help but see that with social media there was new forms of entertainment where you watch people doing stuff, for example. Like you watch other people playing video games that you yourself are not even playing. Or you watch other people trying certain exotic foods or certain sweets from other countries that you yourself are not eating. There's a whole genre of people just showing you what they bought at the store, doing hauls after they have gone shopping. And there's a whole genre of reaction videos where you just see people watching other people, watching the news, watching movies, and reacting to that. Like someone maybe watching some old cult classic movie and that he hasn't seen before. Now you can see the faces he makes while watching that movie. And this is some sort of entertainment. It seems to be pleasant in some way to the people who watch this. I assume otherwise they would not watch it if they were completely bored by it. But clearly, it is completely empty. It is completely without substance, without any spirit. It doesn't give anything to you. In German, we have this expression for passing your time. We say to beat time to death. And I think that is a quite fitting expression for what people are doing here. They are beating the empty time to death because they don't know what to do with that time. But really, it is pure emptiness. I mean, instead of having watched for so and so many hours in your life these reaction videos or TikTok dances or actual pornography, you might as well have just lived a shorter period of time. Or you might as well just have fallen into deep, dreamless sleep for all those hours in which you did nothing but consume this stuff. What would it have changed? Nothing. And again, it's also that this stuff just gets consumed and it doesn't even give you the memory. I mean, with pornography proper, if you watch lots of it, you probably can't say what scenes exactly you have watched or even which people, which porn stars exactly you have watched. Maybe some will be kept in your memory, but the vast majority will just be a number of tits and dicks, and everything is really replaceable here. And the same, I would argue, is true not just for proper pornography, but also for many of the shows that people watch, or many of the TikToks they watch, or many of the memes they look at, or whatever. All of that is replaceable and doesn't even leave a trace in your memory. And again, it doesn't inspire you to be active, because it is the complete opposite of activity. It is complete passivity, just consuming. And I find it quite, quite telling and quite concerning that even when we have a work of art that tries to be more than just entertainment, that may have some sort of substance, because I'm not saying that such works of art are not produced anymore in modern times, but there seems to be this drive, this obsession almost, to deprive it of its substance, to turn it into something just as empty, just as meaningless as all the other pleasant art. I think we can see that currently quite often when books, which as books might have been decent books, are turned into shows. doesn't matter if it's by Netflix or Amazon or HBO or whatever. Like, think of the Lord of the Rings books and this new Wings of Power show, or think of the Witcher books and this new Witcher series, or think of the A Song of Ice and Fire books and of Game of Thrones. These series, these shows, they are usually meaningless, superficial. Again, they are porn. I mean, when it comes to Game of Thrones, it's often literally porn, right? Every episode has these naked boobs walking around, as I already said. But even apart from that, it's not just sexual porn, it's also one-liner porn. Always you have people in some word fights. Yeah, you have all these great masterminds, these great chess players with the intrigues, and then somehow, because apparently they have no better things to do in their free time, they meet in an empty throne room and they exchange cool sounding but quite empty lines with one another. Yeah, or you have shock porn in it, right? So this or that character, you came to like him, well, now he's dead. And then you came to like this character, too bad he's dead too now. And that is really all it is. And if you think about it, these things, they leave no real impact, no real, not even a cultural imprint. I mean, Game of Thrones was such a big phenomenon. Everyone and their grandmother was watching the finale of Game of Thrones some years back. But now, what is really left of that? What did it do to us, to our culture, to our society? Or then, some recent years ago, when Marvel was such a big thing and everyone was watching the Endgame movie. Like it was the highest grossing movie of all time. Everyone saw it. But really, what did it do? I mean, if you go back to some other older classic movies, like let's take something like Star Wars. And I'm not saying that's the highest art, but I mean, Darth Vader to this day is sort of the iconic villain. You can't say the same of Thanos. Even though way more people went into those Marvel movies than into Star Wars back in the day, still, as I said, the unaufkläring people, they are in the moment. In the moment, it might be the biggest thing in the world. But it's sort of just an empty bubble. That, like a bubble of soap, it may look nice for a moment, but then it bursts and it's as if it had never been there. And with some of the shows I named, you will now have many people complaining about them and talking about how bad they are, like shows like The Rings of Power or the Witcher show. But unfortunately, the discourse is mostly dominated by some unhinged, superficial alt-right dudes who, well, think that being a movie critic or a culture critic is just complaining about wokeness, and they will claim that these shows are just bad because they are woke. And I mean, I'm really not a fan of woke ideology. I'm the last person you will find defending wokeness. But let's be clear here. The problem, the main issue with these things runs much, much deeper than some wokeness. Sure, it might be kind of ridiculous in some cases when a clearly white character gets replaced with a black character, and now in a medieval setting you have a random black person running around. But let's make no mistake here, the show would have been equally bad if that person had been white. I mean, let's just, for one example, focus in on the Game of Thrones show. Because I think here it's especially telling. The actual books they actually fit our time quite well, if you think about it. I mean, the story is basically about a threat that threatens the whole planet, that threatens all humans. The threat of an eternal winter embracing the world, and everyone basically being turned into an ice zombie by evil ice demons. And the extinction of all life on Earth. That's what's at stake. People, however, are not taking this threat seriously, or not even believing in it at all. Instead, what they are doing is fighting civil wars, playing political games of intrigue, fighting over who will sit on the throne, even though it won't matter if there's an eternal winter and everyone gets turned into a zombie. And now, because from the north these ice demons approach, the wildlings living in the north, they migrate as refugees to the south because of this change of climate, essentially. And the people from the south try to hold them back with a giant wall. And the people from the south are racist, treating them as wild barbarians. And again, they focus only on this symptom, on these refugees turning up at their doorstep, instead of asking the question, well, why do these people flee here in the first place? And mind you, this was written mainly in the 90s, so way before our current pressing issues. But it really fits our time. I mean, you just have to basically replace the eternal winter with eternal summer, and basically turn it from a magical event into something that can be explained scientifically, and you basically have our actual situation. And I mean, these books could teach people something. They could teach people not to be distracted by day-to-day politics and by partisan issues and by ideological scrabbles and games, but rather to unite and to focus on the bigger threat. But then the show turned that on its head. It's in the very name. Instead of calling it, like the books, A Song of Ice and Fire, they named it after only the first book, Game of Thrones, as if the main thing was the political intrigue. And to the makers of that show, it absolutely was. I mean, they basically admitted as much. They were only interested in the intrigue and the manipulations and the betrayals, and they made what should be the main issue, they turned it into a side issue. I mean, the threat of the eternal winter and the ice demons is resolved not in the last episode, but before that. And then, for the last episode, they turn back to the political bullshit. While in the books, it's exactly the other way around. The political bullshit is the side issue, and people need to learn to focus on the real issue. And I mean, you could also go into more detail. I mean, the books, apart from this main plot, they are asking certain questions, like what makes a knight? Is the one who has the title, who has been knighted, but abuses his position, is he really a knight? Or is it maybe the outsider, ostracized by society, without the title of knight, but who actually behaves in an honorable manner and actually tries to help the weak, who is truly chivalrous? Or what makes a king? What makes a ruler? Who is the true king? Is it he who has the power, who has the biggest army and can conquer the land? Or is it he who is the legitimate heir of the previous king, so who is king by rights, who is justified in claiming the throne. What is it that matters? The books ask such questions, while the showmakers very explicitly stated that they are not interested in such questions. Very explicitly said that themes, according to them, are for exams you write in middle school. And they, in their enlightened cynicism, so in their Aufklärung, they are way beyond that. And last but not least, the books also show that this Game of Thrones, not just is it a dangerous distraction from what really matters, even by itself it is bullshit. It doesn't work. That's quite important. In the book, yes, there is intrigue, but it doesn't really work out. Like, you have a character thinking she is the great chess master, pulling all the strings, treating everyone as a pawn, and in the end she just destroys everything she has. She just ruins everything for herself, which she didn't need to do. While in the show, they actually turned everything into a ridiculous intrigue and conspiracy. Like, in the show, you have this noble house, which is very rich because of its gold mines. That's also in the books. But then in the show, they just made up the fact that these gold mines have recently run out of gold. Like, all the mines, all at once, they stopped producing gold. And now this house just pretends being rich. Like, apparently this just works. Like, all the miners, apparently somehow they could just be shut up. No one is talking. No one is saying, oh, actually we are not mining gold anymore. We can't find any more gold. Somehow thousands of people involved in this mining business, and still word doesn't get out. And also somehow no one realizes that this house is running out of money. I mean, this is ridiculous and it is dangerous. I mean, there are so many people who believe in conspiracy theories, who believe that this is how the world works. There are powerful people who are lying to us, who are creating a fake reality for us. A show like that confirms these beliefs, while the books do the opposite. The books show quite well that, sure, there might be people who want to do conspiracies, who want to do intrigue, but in the end it doesn't work, because people are not just pawns. People, you can't just they aren't just passive. They don't just let themselves be used however you want, but rather they have their own agencies, and therefore you can't really plan things. All the plans won't work out because someone will act differently from how you wanted or expected him to act, and that might ruin the whole plan. And with all of that, it's almost as if there was this actual conspiracy going on to ruin actual artworks. Since you can't just burn these books or forbid them, to sort of strip them of their substance. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that this really is a conspiracy. I'm not saying this is done in a conscious manner, with a conscious purpose. But it is done nonetheless, even though it's happening unconsciously. There is art which could teach us something. There is art which could inspire us to action. And then there is the pleasant art, and even the art of the first kind often is turned into such pleasant art, which is making us passive, which is making us sleepy, so to say, which is just making us sit around and consume and not think much and not do much. I do want to stress, however, that by all of this, I'm not saying that true art cannot be pleasant or entertaining at all. Art could be pleasant and beautiful at the same time. And I don't want to say the opposite. I don't want to say that true art has to be boring. I don't want to say it has to be this high intellectual thing that a normal person couldn't enjoy. There are some people who have such an understanding of art. There are even artists who, it's almost like they try to make their art insufferable, and like when only 2 or 3 people like it, they feel validated by that, because they believe that if something is liked by the masses, then it must be superficial. It can't be true art if people actually enjoy it. Like certain modern art or certain art house movies or whatever, where it's almost as if they try to be as unpleasant as possible. I'm not saying this is the only true art, not at all. I mean, if you look back, the ancient Greek tragedies, like someone like Sophocles with his tragedies, that was enjoyed not just by a few educated people, but by the masses. The actual people went there and watched that. Same with the plays of Shakespeare. They were not just for the high classes, for the sort of professors of literature who nowadays might enjoy Shakespeare. But no, they were also for the broader masses. That's not a contradiction. And also, I'm not saying that there's no place at all for entertainment or for relaxing. I mean, we do need to relax in order to gather new strengths again. I mean, we do that every night when we sleep. And so there might be a place for that. There might even be a place for pornography and for masturbation. But for one, you should move beyond just that at some point in your life. I mean, it's one thing if a young teenager masturbates to pornography, but when you grow older, you maybe should learn to actually get in contact with actual human beings, to actually find a partner, and maybe should move on from just wanking. And also, even if there is a place for such a thing, at least we should see it for what it is. I mean, it's one thing to consume pornography, but then be honest about it being pornography and don't treat it like it is somehow high art or on one level with real beautiful art. But with that, I want to turn exactly to this beautiful art, because so far I mostly discussed what it is not. Well, what it is, however, should now be quite clear, both if you contrasted it with the merely pleasant art, which I talked about in this lecture, and also if you think back to what I said in the previous lectures on beauty. Beautiful art, to Kant, is something which, unlike the pleasant art, does not speak only to our senses, no matter if in a very simple way, like maybe the actual pornography does, and in a more artificial way. Still, if it is pleasant art, it speaks to our senses. That is, we take pleasure from the material of the artwork, from its actual content. The beautiful work of art is something that brings us pleasure by its mere form, by the way we contemplate this form. We take a disinterested pleasure from it. And this is a form of art that is not just consumed and that is not just used up, Kant says. Rather, it is a sort of art that actually cultivates me. And it therefore can be enjoyed probably more than once. It actually in that way has an opposite effect as compared to the pleasant art. Our senses, if used again and again, They become sort of blunt, or they become tired of something. I don't want to constantly taste the same thing. That's exactly why, as I said, you don't want to hear the same joke or watch the same porn over and over, or you don't want to be spoiled because once you know the twist in the plot, it's not so exciting anymore. But the beautiful artwork, here it's the opposite. You do want to enjoy it several times, and maybe you will even enjoy it more with time, because it doesn't tire you out, so to say. Rather, it refines you, it cultivates you, it gives your spirit new ideas that you can think about, that you can reflect about, that you can take away from it. And also it refines and cultivates your taste. Your taste actually gets shaped by the beautiful, by viewing beautiful things. At first, you will not have much taste. You will be more of a barbarian with a crude taste. And the more beautiful things you experience, the more refined your taste gets, and therefore, the more pleasure you will find in watching more beautiful things. So that is the special thing about beautiful art, Kant says, that it doesn't, you don't get tired of it, but quite the opposite. The more you enjoy it, the more you turn into someone who can enjoy it, the more you turn into a connoisseur, so to say. So Kant still says that even that beautiful art can get tiring or boring if it is just that, if it is just beautiful art, because eventually we will find that too empty or waste of time. Therefore, Kant says the beautiful art should always express moral ideas, because in the end it is morality that really matters. It is our moral vocation to be good, to do good in this world, that really matters. And so the beautiful art should give us and should strengthen our moral ideas. What Kant also says is that beautiful art needs to be free art. I mean, there used to be this expression of the artis liberalis, the liberal arts. And Kant says that this beautiful art is free in two ways. Because for one, it is not an art that can be ordered. The mechanical art and also the merely pleasant aesthetical art, they can both be produced when you want to produce them, right? If you know how to, let's say, build a house, or if you know how to build a car, then you can do it whenever you want, and maybe when someone pays you. And also, if you know how in general, how to create a piece of music or a movie or whatever, you can always do it. It's not difficult. This art can be requested, maybe for certain occasions, like maybe you write a poem or a song for someone's birthday or whatever. And this art can be paid for. Like maybe you are a writer or a screenwriter or a musician or whatever, who actually gets paid to produce a new artwork. But that is then not beautiful art. Beautiful art cannot be produced on command, whether it's because someone demands it or someone wishes for it or someone pays you for it. No, you need inspiration. You need to be, as the expression goes, kissed by the muses. Beautiful art is produced by a genius. Again, I will discuss further what a genius is to Kant in the next lecture. And the genius doesn't control his own art production, so to say. The genius himself can't make himself be inspired. He has to sort of wait for the muse to appear and kiss him. But also, beautiful art, according to Kant, must be free in the sense that it must be there for itself. It must be its own end. And it must not be made to serve another purpose. If you use an artwork in order to teach people a lesson, or in order to do propaganda of some kind, or in order to basically produce a commercial and use this work of art as a commercial for one thing or another, then no matter what your cause is, no matter if you just want to sell certain products or if you want to propagate your ideology, or if you want to educate people, no matter how noble your cause may be, still the artwork is now not free. The genius can now not freely express itself and just produce whatever fits his inspiration, whatever the muse, so to say, makes him produce, but rather he has to sort of limit his genius. He has to subjugate his ideas to whatever cause, whatever end he wants them to serve. And then it's no longer beautiful art. And I think if we consider this twofold freedom that a beautiful artwork needs to have, it cannot be ordered or paid for, and it also cannot serve another end, but must stand for itself, then we can quite easily realize that most of what is considered art nowadays is indeed not art. I can also add that to Kant, all the various forms of art are not on the same level and they don't have the same value, but rather to him it depends on what they work with, what, so to say, their material is. Because the beautiful is in the form, and therefore also beautiful art is about the form. But you need to give the form to something. There needs to be some material, some multiplicity, which gets formed, which gets shaped in that way. And Kant would say that music gives a certain form to sensations, namely to sounds. While plastic art, such as creating paintings or statues or architecture, creating buildings, plastic art gives form not to mere sensations, but to images, to our imagination. And poetry, literature, gives form actually to concepts, so to something intellectual, because here I don't just have certain sensations, certain sounds, I also don't just have certain images that can be seen, but rather I have something that can be thought, something that actually makes sense to our intellect, something that can be understood. I express certain thoughts and certain intellectual ideas in a beautiful form, but still they are certain intellectual concepts. And that is exactly why to Kant this sort of poetry is the highest form of art, while music to him is a much lower form. But of that you can make what you want. I could end talking about art here, because this is mostly what Kant says. But there's one more thing I want to add that goes a bit beyond Kant, but without contradicting him. Because nowadays we find that there's another kind of art. You sometimes hear talk of concept art, right? We find there's modern forms of art that cannot really be described in terms of being pleasant, because the people who just want pleasant art, who just want their senses titillated, are usually the people who are the least interested in this modern concept art, precisely because it does not speak to their senses. But also, you cannot really describe it as beautiful art. It is not beautiful in their form. And it is not something that we enjoy in mere contemplation. But still, it probably should be considered some form of aesthetical art, right? It's certainly not just mechanical art. It's certainly not meant to be useful if someone tapes a banana to a wall or puts a glass of water somewhere and claims that it is an oak tree. It's not pleasant, it's not beautiful, but it's certainly not useful. So what is it then? I would say that actually in Kant's architectonic there is a place for such art. If you go back to my lecture on what is pleasure and displeasure to Kant, there are after all three kinds of pleasure. Yes, there is the sense pleasure where I receive pleasurable sensations. And yes, there is the aesthetical pleasure of the beautiful and also the sublime. But then there is the intellectual pleasure. And the intellect is the faculty of concepts. And here we have something which actually is called concept art. The intellectual pleasure coming from understanding something with our intellect based on our concepts and approving of it based on this understanding of ours. And I think that is what happens here, right? This art still wants to create some sort of pleasure. I mean, it still wants to speak to people in some way. But the pleasure is not sensual and it's not contemplative. It is a pleasure that people get from the intellect, from thinking about this artwork and thinking about what it means, what the artist might want to express with it, and basically approving of this message of the artwork. And I'm mentioning this also not just to explain what this modern concept art is, and I don't want to get into what one might say about this concept art, about whether it's a good or a bad form of art. I don't want to discuss that here. I want to leave that open here. Rather, I'm mentioning it because Kant is stressing that the method of science should be, and especially here in philosophy, should be architectonic. I talked about that further in its own lecture. And basically to him that means that you should not just look around empirically and in this case look what forms of art you may find. I can see there's pleasant art, I can see there's beautiful art, and that's it. In Kant days there wasn't really something like concept art yet, and nowadays we can look around and also find concept art, and maybe in another century we will find something else if we look around. No, that's not scientific to Kant, but rather he says you should start with an idea, and from that idea you can create a sort of architectonic schema of your science. You can know sort of what is the basic skeleton, the basic system, the basic structure of the system you are working with, which helps you, if you now in the empirical looking around find a new phenomenon, it helps you immediately knowing where you need to put it in the system, what the place of this phenomenon in the system is. You immediately know if it even is a new phenomenon or just maybe a form, a subcategory of something you already know. And also, the other way around, if in the empirical looking around, so to say, you have not spotted a certain thing yet. By looking at your architectonic plan of the whole, you can know whether there is a gap in your science, whether there is something missing, whether there is a gap that could yet be filled, or whether your science is already complete, Kant says. And he employs this architectonic method often, but not always. There are also quite a few instances where he seems to sort of forget his own method or not strictly follow it, where he sticks to whatever he finds empirically, whatever is already known in his time, without stopping to think if there maybe could be something else that, so to say, his system, the structure of his system calls for, even if it's not there yet. And I would say that this is such a case. And that's why I wanted to talk about this example. When we find that nowadays there is a form of art, this concept art, again, no matter what we think of it and its value, but it is something that exists at least. If we find nowadays that there is such a thing, a superficial thinker could say, oh, so Kant's theory of art is wrong because this doesn't fit into that theory. But rather, I would say his theory of art is not wrong so much as incomplete, and he himself, if he had wanted to, could have seen that it is incomplete. If there are indeed, as he says, three kinds of pleasure, sense pleasure, aesthetical pleasure of the beautiful, and intellectual pleasure, approval of the good, then by his own architectonic method, we should assume there being three kinds of aesthetical art that tries to create pleasure. And I think nowadays we have found that third kind, that intellectual art, so to say, that concept art. But with that, I want to conclude this lecture on art. As I already announced, the next lecture will be about the artist, so to say, so about the genius, about the person producing the art. And that, I think, will also help understanding Kant's concept of art better. So in that next lecture, I will probably get to even more clarity about what art should be to Kant. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Christos Pei, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.